Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents My Daughter Left the Nest and Returned to Nest Rank Adventure, Volume 6, by Mojikakiya. Translated by Roy Nukia. Narrated by Derek Shoales. Chapter 71. Angeline tightly clenched her eyelids. Angeline tightly clenched her eyelids until, after a time, she drifted off to sleep. What came next was a peculiar dream of sitting alone in a dark room, though she could not even be sure that it was a room. She could not see any of the four walls, and everything above and below her seemed to consist of the same empty black void, as though she was floating in space. And yet she could feel a floor of sorts beneath her feet, albeit one of an uncertain and insubstantial nature. It was all strangely ambiguous, and she couldn't dismiss the possibility that she was simply deluding herself into believing there was anything there. She stared at her hand, opening and closing it. There were no lamps or candles, and yet she could distinctly see the tips of her toes and her arms curled around her knees. It was like everything except her had lost all substance. It was neither hot nor cold there, the concept of temperature itself seemingly absent. Though she felt like this should have been comfortable, she was strangely tense and unsettled. She tried to muster words to call out, yet her mouth could only form each syllable silently. A strange sense of loneliness washed over her. She tried to stand, but felt as though there would be no turning back if she did, and she could not muster the strength in any case. Before she realized it, the surrounding darkness began to solidify. It suddenly became difficult to breathe as the dark encroached closer and closer. She made to cry out in fear, but was still unable to make a sound, and could only feel it tightening in the depths of her throat. It was not long until the pitch-black darkness was crawling over her skin and covering her body. Angeline was catapulted out of her sleep, only to be taken aback by a pair of black eyes staring at her. "Morning, sis." "It's good morning." Angeline scratched her head and sighed. She knew she had had a terrible dream, but she could hardly remember it now. She had roused in a terrible mood, but those feelings had been swept away once she was fully awake, and soon enough she had forgotten she had dreamed at all. The sun was already rising in the fine spring weather, and its light pouring in through the window highlighted every fluttering speck of dust. There didn't seem to be anyone in the house save for Angeline and Mitt. The others must have headed off somewhere. "I overslept. Where did everyone go?" "Out. They could have woken me up." "You were sleeping soundly, so Dad said to let you sleep." Angeline pouted as she stretched, her spine cracking in the process. After letting out a deep breath, she saw that Mitt was still sitting beside her, and she absent-mindedly began combing her fingers through his hair. The boy closed his eyes at the ticklish sensation. Angeline doted on her enigma of a little brother, who was sometimes a little sister on some days. With his long black hair and black eyes, they looked like real siblings when they stood next to each other, though his expressions were neutral compared to hers. With his apparent age sitting somewhere around 10 years by the looks of him, there did not seem to be much of a difference between the two. She heard the sound of something striking wood from outside, a metal hammer, presumably. With so many new family members, the house had finally begun to feel cramped, so they had opted to extend it lengthwise. Angeline put on her coat and walked outside, leading Mitt by the hand. The warm summer sunlight poured down over the land, which was covered with sprouting greens, and she felt a stinging in the back of her eyes. The yard was lively with flowers of all sizes, some of which were already in bloom, and others soon to follow. Anessa and Miriam sat on a bench in the corner, watching fondly over the steady progress being made on the house. "Morning." "Oh, Angie. Morning." "Morning. You're out like a light," Miriam said with a chuckle. Angeline sat beside her and lifted Mitt onto her lap. "In spring, one sleeps a sleep that goes on." "Wasn't it knows no dawn?" Anessa suggested. "Well, something like that." Angeline's great yawn proved contagious and spread to Mitt, whose mouth opened wide as well. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since she had returned to Turnera. The colors of spring grew more vibrant by the day in time with the steadily warming breeze. The villagers' endeavors in their fields worked the winter stiffness out of their bodies, while the sheep and goats spent every day eating their fill of the fresh, aromatic foliage. Angeline was enjoying Turnera's spring to the fullest. She had been wandering the mountains with Anessa and Miriam, gathering mountain plants, driving the sheep with Mitt on her back, and taking Charlotte and Biako around to help with the field work. She enjoyed chatting with her childhood friends and was delighted to see Charlotte so full of life. The winter she spent in Orphan with Belgrieve had been fun, but it truly did take a load off her shoulders when she had returned to her hometown. If this was how it was going to be, then maybe it would be better for Belgrieve to await her return in Turnera rather than convincing him to live with her in Orphan. Of course, once it came time for her to head back to Orphan, she would grow lonely once more and wish for him to accompany her then.
"The weather's swell. Really puts you in a good mood, huh?"
Anessa mused as she stood and stretched. She inhaled deeply before looking up at the refreshing, piercing blue sky. Angeline fiddled with Mitt's hair as she scanned the area. "Where's everyone else?"
"Mr. Bell went out with Mr. Carey. Mr. Graham is looking after the kids. Mr. Kasim is teaching everyone magic. And Shar and Biako are with him."
Angeline embraced Mitt's head and rested her chin on his crown.
"I feel lazy."
"Right? This really is the best place to relax,"
said Miriam. She wasn't even wearing the wide-brimmed hat she was usually so obstinate about, and her cat ears comfortably swayed in the breeze. Miriam had stopped hiding them around her comrades in Belgrieve, but she had still been wary around Turnera's villagers. With Angeline's encouragement, she eventually revealed her ears to the villagers, who found them to be cute and fluffy, and subjected her to unrestrained hair ruffling. She felt no discrimination or undue consideration, and began to feel idiotic for hiding her ears away. Still feeling a bit sleepy, Angeline mulled over all sorts of things in her drowsy stupor. Much had happened the first time she had tried to return, and this time was no different. It was quite troublesome to her how a problem seemed to break out every time, but it would be a lie to say she didn't think back on those events somewhat fondly after the fact. There had been a bit of a quarrel this time, but no major incident.
All's well that ends well.
She wondered what Giacomo and Lucille were doing now. Angeline let out a deep breath and began squishing Mitt's cheeks, which were soft and delightful to touch. Mitt silently let her do as she wanted.
"You never put up any resistance, do you?"
"Resist?"
Mitt blinked. With a rather amused look on her face, Miriam began to pat the boy.
"You're so cute, Mitt."
"Cute?"
he parroted again.
"So in the end, what even are demons?"
Anessa said with a slight resigned smile.
"When I look at Mitt, I just don't know anymore." "No clue, but, well, it doesn't matter."
"Right. If they attack you, then you take them down. If they're lovable, then dote on them. Isn't that good enough?"
"You got that right."
"Hey, that was Southernese."
"I learned it from Lucille." "I wonder where those two are right now."
"They must have passed through Orphan already, though I doubt they've reached Estigal yet."
There was a clattering as the carpenters climbed down from the roof. Evidently it was break time. The extension was still just a skeletal frame, but it was no less exciting to look at.
"What will my new life be like?"
Angeline wondered, her heart filled with expectation. Mitt stirred.
"Wanna walk?"
he muttered.
"All right, let's go."
So Mitt got up and began on his way to the town square, and Angeline and Miriam took hold of his hands. Sometimes they would pull hard enough to lift him off the ground and send his feet cycling through the air. When they reached the square, they saw several children and young adults gathered around Kasim, with Charlotte and Biako among them. At the very front of the crowd, Rita was holding out her hands with a strained look on her face, staring long and hard at her palms. Eventually, there was a slight flicker in the air, and then a flame, eliciting cheers from the onlookers.
"Oh, looks like you're getting it,"
Kasim said, cackling.
"Yay!"
Rita proudly stuck out her chest after extinguishing the fire. Standing a little farther in the back, Barnes opened and closed his mouth, looking less than satisfied.
"Darn it, why is it always you? I can't get a peep out of it."
"Don't worry, I'll protect you."
That's not the problem.
Oh, sis!
Charlotte waved her hands as she saw the group walking towards them.
Is everyone doing well?
Yeah, Rita is very good.
I was watching. Not bad, Rita.
I'm going to protect Bonds, right?
Rita said, hugging Barnes's arm. Barnes bashfully pouted.
You two get along well.
Miriam chuckled.
We do.
Barnes still seemed unsatisfied. Angeline looked around and noticed that there was no one else in the square, save for the small gathering.
Didn't you start out with more people?
Yeah, some went off with old Graham to practice their swordsmanship outside of town, and calling me impressed. They've all got a knack for it. Is it because Belle taught them the fundamentals?
Dad is a great teacher.
I'll give him that, Kasim said. He patted Barnes on the back. Hey, quit sulking. Even if you're no good at magic, your sword's not half bad. Didn't you hear it from the old man?
I know, but...
You'll protect me too?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rita rubbed her cheek against his shoulder.
Someone loves to put on a show,
Kasim observed as he kneaded his beard. With the spring festival behind them and the most urgent jobs taken care of, the village youth were learning swordsmanship from Graham and Belgrieve, and magic from Kasim. Having picked up the fundamentals from Belgrieve and experienced combat against fiends several times, these youths steadily absorbed their new teachings. According to Graham and Kasim, though they might not reach the higher ranks, several of them were skilled enough for B rank at the very least. It was never a bad thing to be able to protect oneself. Though in common, fiends did appear in Turnera, and there was no guarantee that bandits would never show up. And apart from all these logical reasons, the village youth, brimming with energy, naturally longed for the world of swords and magic. Kasim clapped his hands together.
Now then, let's give it another go, shall we? You need to keep a proper image in mind.
Everyone's working hard. Do you think we're seeing a new generation of adventurers?
Now we won't have to worry about fiends.
Still, they learned the basics from the Red Ogre, then built upon that foundation under the Ether Buster and the Paladin. Where exactly is Turnera headed from here?
Anessa muttered wryly as she watched them get back to their magic training. Spring fieldwork took on many forms, but first and foremost was tilling the fields. The winter soil had to be loosened up, and their staple foods of wheat and potatoes needed to be planted. The mountains around Turnera opened to the east, and there was no scarcity of sunny farmland in that direction. The fields could expand as far as need be, limited only by the extra labor each new plot of land would require. It was a farmer's nature to go as far as they could, but there was no point in having a field beyond one's means. Farming and livestock were Turnera's primary industries. Their agriculture centered around wheat, potatoes, and beans, and each house would raise its own selection of seasonal vegetables. They took wool from the sheep, milk from the goats, and eggs from the chickens, and in the end, each of these would contribute meat as well. The village did have a communal field and farm, but it was normal for each household to keep its own field and animals on top of this. The tips and tricks they had piled up since the founding of the village had finally borne fruit, and the yields were great enough that no villager ever had to starve, even in the harshest of winters. All of this was rooted in self-sufficiency. Some produce was set aside for taxes, and any surplus would be traded with peddlers. There was little use for anything beyond that, so hardly anyone in Turnera produced more than was needed. However, now that the roads would be maintained, there would be more business dealings than before. Rather than seeing trade as a way to offload their excess, perhaps they would begin to engage in commercial agriculture for the purpose of profit. These roads would not bring immediate success, but that was no different than the fields. Nobody expected the greatest yields in the first year they were plowed. The land had to be built up year after year through tilling, weeding, and fertilizing. Belgrieve had scouted around the village with Carrie and the other farmers through the morning hours in search of prime spots for new fields. Their party was now making their way westward from the village. These plots of land were closer to the mountain, and the sun would be scarcer in the evening hours, but most crops only needed the morning light. Moreover, the lack of tough thatches growing around there meant the soil would be easy to cultivate.
The eastern parts are close to the pastures.
I reckon we do good over here. Yeah, those sheep need their fresh grass. One of the farmers tapped the end of their cane against the ground. Not bad. We could have it soft in 2 years. We'll start with scrap wheat. Plow it under around the time the fresh buds come out, and it'll make for fine fertilizer. More rocks than I would have liked, but it should be fine, Belgrieve concluded. We could gather them up and use them as the foundation for a new house. Right. We're working on Belle's place right now, but we'll eventually need a large storehouse. On that note, Belle, your family's really growing, ain't it? And he don't even got a wife. The farmer's laughter elicited head-scratching from Belgrieve. It's a strange circumstance, to be sure, but it's nice and lively. In any case, looks like all sorts of things are going to change. Once those roads are done, I just know those kids will want to venture out into the world. Right, but who could blame them? The villagers let out a collective sigh. They were all part of Belgrieve's generation, and they all had families of their own. They thought nothing of working in the village until they died of old age. But in just the past year, the village youth had developed a deep fascination with the world. Angeline, who had played with them in their younger years, had managed to make a name for herself in the big city and returned a hero. She had undoubtedly influenced them greatly, drawing their hearts out of the village. Even now, though it came under the pretense of self-defense, many young villagers were learning swordsmanship from Graham and magic from Kasim. Earlier that very day, they had passed by those young men and women eagerly heading out with their swords. Belgrieve had managed to keep them from growing arrogant in their new skills, but once they were strong enough, the village elders worried they would leave their home behind. For his part, Belgrieve felt rather conflicted. He idly plucked at his beard. What's wrong with that? Carrie cackled. It's good to see those young'uns so full of life, and I'm sure Belle will keep dragging in people from the outside. The farmers immediately burst into laughter. No doubt about that. If he keeps bringing in those cute girls, we'll have no shortage of brides. No, first we need to find a bride for Belle, don't we? No can do. He's already got a gal in his heart. It's not like that, I'm telling you, Belgrieve said with a troubled laugh. Carrie patted him on the back. Don't be so embarrassed. You're going on another journey to find her, aren't you? Well, I am, but... His desire to lay his past to rest had yet to change. By meeting Kasim, he had managed to face one aspect he had left behind. The other day he had heard of Percival's whereabouts from Giacomo and Lucille, and there was naturally no choice save for going out to meet him. In all likelihood, he would never feel at peace until he found Sati as well. It felt as though the flow of fate was pushing him forward. And yet, he was not so youthful as to let whims immediately turn into actions. He hadn't been in the best of health for a while after he returned. It hadn't bothered him while he was an orphan, but after returning home and relaxing, he had found he could not work properly once the spring festival was over, and had to spend several days in bed. It wouldn't be funny if he pushed himself too hard and ruined his body. Instead of facing his past, that would be akin to letting his past break him. He wanted to live in the present. Then when are you heading out? Hey, it doesn't have to be too soon. Summer at the earliest, Belgrieve answered. That sounds pretty soon to me. You're a pretty lively fellow, good grief. You don't have to tag along with us today, then. Shouldn't you be busy preparing for your adventure? Belgrieve shook his head. There's not much to prepare. Just going to stuff a few things in my bag. And I'm not going out to die in a ditch. Once I'm back from my journey, I'll be tilling the fields just as usual. Naturally, I need to concern myself with our new farmland. I guess that's true. Don't exclude me like that, good grief, Belgrieve jokingly said, and the villagers awkwardly laughed along. We've been relying on you a lot. At the very least, we want you to do what you want to do. Right. Sorry about back then, Belle. No need to bring it back up. Hey, what's everyone getting sappy for? We saw the place. Now let's go back and set up some plans. Kasim's matter-of-fact words were enough to dispel the downturned atmosphere. Belgrieve didn't want things to take a maudlin turn either, but he knew they were looking out for him in their own way. The group headed to Hoffman's house. Hoffman was inspecting harnesses and hoes in the yard, washing away grime and sharpening the farming implements. "Hey, Chief. Back so soon? So how is it? You find a good spot?" "There was a fine place to the west. We thought we'd begin planning." "Good to know. Hey, honey, could you get some tea on the stove?" Hoffman yelled into the house, urging everyone to sit around the table in the yard. Then wispy clouds drifted across the sky, turning the piercing blue sky a fainter shade of aqua. The sun reached its zenith and began its westward descent, and gradually the light grew more intense. Opinions were exchanged on what to plant: wheat, potatoes, or maybe a new local specialty. "For now, let's get the site ready for anything." "Right, we'll throw in some manure and build up the soil." "What about after that?" "The grapevines are growing nicely. How about some new fruit trees?" "Yeah, but trees take time. We won't know if they're doing well for a while." "We'll get some good returns if it goes well." "If it goes well. But what do we do if they don't sell and can't be used?" "Hey, can't we just use the place to increase our wheat production?" "That would work, but we'll need more farmhands. No use in having so much wheat that it attracts bugs." "So we'll need to prepare the plot, fertilize, and plant before harvest. That will take twice our workforce." "And these northern regions already have Bordeaux for wheat. We won't get a good price if we start growing it here." "In that case, fruit looks like the best option. How about we plant some acorns and raise pigs then?" "Stupid Rodina has us cornered in that market." "That's right. In the first place, I hate how smelly those things can be." "Who cares if I hate them or not?" "Say that again." "Hey now, no fighting." "Say we plant fruit. What would be best then? Should we grow the vineyards and start some full-blown wine production? Any good ideas, Belle?" As he folded his arms in thought, Mitt arrived with Angeline.
The old men are plotting something nasty.
Plotting?
"Hey, Angie!" "So you found us." After racing over, Mitt clambered up Belgrieve's back, and Angeline took a seat beside him. "What's wrong? Weren't you with the others?"
Yeah, but everyone's practicing, so I came with Mitt to see what you were doing.
"I see. They're all doing their best."
And for what? They can get as strong as they want, but they'll rot if they can't grow food to put on the table.
Now, it's not like they're slacking on their work.
"Hey, Angie, we're thinking of what to plant as a Turnera specialty. Do you have anything in mind?"
Carrie asked. Angeline tilted her head.
What will a specialty do for you?
"You know how the roads are going to be maintained, right? If more people come through, we'll get more peddlers than before, and it would be nice to have something to sell them. We've been known to make good stuff around here, but we don't have enough to sell more."
Angeline looked at Belgrieve.
It can't be perishable, right?
"That's right. It'll be transported long distance, so something preserved would be nice. There aren't many people equipped with cooling magic out there." In any case, preserved goods were best for those who peddled their wares all over. Even if they didn't sell, they were a less risky good to keep on hand around the village.
So, either dried, salted, or fermented.
It would have to be something along those lines.
And we wouldn't want to stick our hands into something we're not familiar with.
Angeline thought for a moment before suddenly lifting her head.
What about medicinal herbs?
Like what?
Well, how about rummel trees?
Rummel was an evergreen tree that gave off a striking, sinus-piercing scent. Its leaves could be crushed into a salve that worked well on external wounds. If water was then added to this concoction and it boiled until viscous, it could keep for about a month. Dried leaves could be mixed in hot water to wash wounds as well. The sap was also usable, and the bark and roots could be boiled into a drinkable potion. Low-grade adventurers unable to buy elixirs would often turn to it. Rummel was used in Turnera as well for folk remedies, but they simply picked from wild plants and never cultivated it. Belgrieve stroked his beard. "That's not a bad idea. Do they still rely on the adventurers to gather rummel leaves?"
Yes, but the bark and roots make good medicine, so they uprooted all the ones around Orphan, and there aren't many these days. I heard someone say the price has gone up.
It's not rare around these parts.
But if it's used that much, won't they just plant it over there?
True, but I've heard it's higher quality when it grows in cold places, and there were people complaining about how it wasn't as effective as it used to be.
How about it, Bell?
Why are you asking me? Well, I definitely heard about that. It grows native to these mountains, so maybe it would be more effective if it were grown in this environment.
I see. We won't have to worry about the saplings then. That makes things simple. It'll be risky to start on a large scale, but we can do a few tests. The climate and soil should be just right. And there's nothing bad about having more medicinal around.
Seeing the villagers grow animated over the topic, Angeline whispered,
Was that a good idea?
Yeah, I'm amazed you thought of it. Good job. Angeline gleefully nuzzled Belgrieve's shoulder, and Mitt placed a hand on her head. As if to imitate Belgrieve, the boy said,
Good job.
There was suddenly laughter about, and Angeline pouted with red cheeks. Damp, stagnant air pooled in the shadowy depths of the woods. Perhaps because of this, it felt as though the darkness itself had gained a stifling mass. There were rows of elderly trees here, their branches laden with dark leaves which formed a canopy overhead to cut off the sun. Without light, there was scarcely any vegetation on the forest floor, and apart from the thin vines climbing the trees and dangling from the branches, only a few low ferns persisted. Someone, a man judging from his build, trod upon this dark soil. His white robe was a striking contrast to the thick darkness, but his eyes and face were comparatively inscrutable in the darkness of his robe's hood. Never mind roads. There weren't even any animal paths to be seen, and yet the man walked with no hesitation. The branches would make a rustling sound each time he passed by them, as though they were warning him to leave. Eventually the man reached the forest depths. There the trees were older and stood even taller than the ones before. They appeared to be dead husks, yet the bumps of new growth on their dry, hollow bark demonstrated their obstinacy. Oh! A peculiar groan filled the air. The branches shook as if these corpse-like trees were breathing. There were no other eyes to see here, yet the man felt as though he was being pierced by countless stares. However, he remained calm and scoffed as if to belittle the foliage. He brandished his hand and chanted with a quiet but clear voice. The longer he chanted, the more mana gathered to him, swirling about like a gale. Pale blue light illuminated the craggy skin of each tree, but in contrast to this illumination, a black shadow oozed from the nooks and crannies of the trees, lingering about the place.
Do you want to be free? Then snatch your freedom. Head north.
Oh. The old trees cried out. The shadows oozing out from them gathered into one great swarm, an immense gathering of aggressive, ill intent. It spread throughout the forest, shifting from tree to tree in the blink of an eye, like a brigade of knights galloping off to vanquish their mortal enemy, or perhaps like a gathering of scoundrels with their ill-gotten prize before their eyes. Shadows burst from trees along the way, adding more warriors to the legion. The man in white folded his arms as he watched them. "Now, what will you do?" he muttered in amusement. A raw scent filled the air. Chapter 72. The kindling gleamed red like a gemstone. The kindling gleamed red like a gemstone, and though there were no flames rising from it, if someone were to place a hand over the embers, it would have been difficult to keep it there for more than a few seconds. The pot hanging over it contained a stew, or rather a simmering concoction of miscellaneous odds and ends. The view out the window was enveloped in night's faint cloak, more a shade of violet than pitch black. The wind could be heard rustling the leaves on the branches.
Now, eat your fill.
An elf girl placed the pot right in the center of the table, eliciting a faint smile from a brown-haired boy.
Here it is, the Elfland specialty, mulligan stew.
Another boy with flaxen hair stared wearily. "Again," he complained. "Is that the only thing you know how to make?"
What's your problem?
The elf girl protested. The brown-haired boy began to serve the stew. "It's not bad, don't get me wrong.
It tastes fine, but, you get sick of it if it...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?